is Getting Answers, Western Mass News.
Each and every week, we focus on the issues that affect all of us here in Western Massachusetts with the newsmakers and people who are making a difference. Speaking of someone making a difference, I'm joined by 1st Congressman Richard Neal this morning. Good to see you.
Great to be with you, Dave.
We have our monthly visits, but it's good to see you in person.
It is. I've been upgrading my skills as it relates to the Zoom. It's always a challenge.
It always works. Well, you have good people to help you out. So, as we sit here on Thursday morning taping the program, I mean, talk about everything being very fluid. We're looking at the situation in Minnesota, the fact that could be a partial government shutdown this weekend, and what's holding it up is the immigration enforcement agenda. You're calling for the impeachment of Kristi Noem.
Well, I think what's happened with the secretary is that she has clearly overstepped her authority, and I think what's debilitating about the reputation of DHS is the constant notion that if they just tell the story, it's true. And I think the fact that she got out front of the story without any facts and said that this fellow that had been killed, Preddy, that he was an assassin. He was shot 10 times while he was lying on the ground. Yeah. Look, we all know that there's a role for immigration enforcement in America. It's an important consideration. But what's happened in Minneapolis is it's now overreach by the part of the Department of Homeland Security and in particular ICE. ICE agents, Dave, are not trained for ground control. They are not street cops. They don't have that special training on how to handle a crowd. And I understand as we've watched the escalation from the president over the last 4 or 5 days, de-escalation in his rhetoric. Very much so. He's trying to get away from what he's been saying. But I think in the case of the Homeland Security Secretary, that there's got to be some radical changes there.
You sent Tom Homan in there. Of course, he was in control of the as far as what was happening on the southern border. But this morning, I was reading in the New York Times that he said this crackdown in Minnesota could wind down if the state would just give us access to prisons.
Well, I think that's kind of a fallback position. I think that, remember in the case of Homan, he was the one that presided over the separation of children from their parents in the border dispute in the past. So I think that de-escalation, again, is important. I think that calming the rhetoric, by the way, it's become more charged everywhere. And clearly, having the ICE agents step back from some of these confrontations would be very helpful.
Where do you see the end game in this? Because now we're hearing more and more about more ICE agents being here in Massachusetts. That what's happening in Minnesota doesn't seem to be curtailing the issue all around the country. We
had a very rare but substantial opportunity to reform the immigration system. We really had the momentum. It was moving in the right direction. Candidate Trump castigated Republican senators and House members for beginning to participate in immigration reform. That was a real setback, and we have not gone near it since, again, because what we were offering as a remedy in a bipartisan manner, Democrat and Republican, Trump didn't see as an electioneering benefit to him.
So as we sit here on Thursday, there's the chance of a partial government shutdown this weekend. A lot of it comes down to the funding for the Department of Homeland Security and the sprawling package for them, tied in with, 5 other bills, right?
Yes. Well, what's happened is that this is how you set the table. And we did that in the House. There was an accommodation where we decided that we would proceed with separating these pieces of legislation. Then we combined 6. Because they were pretty popular. And by the way, many of the cuts that the president had proposed have never happened.
Right.
In fact, the budget for the National Institutes of Health has gone up by $425 million. So we reached an agreement, both sides, and we were able to proceed on getting those that legislation moving forward. But there was also an agreement that said that Democrats would have a chance to offer their dissent as it related to the budget for Homeland Security. Republicans passed it on their own with the help of 7 Democrats. And in the Senate, the rules are not quite that accommodating. So we anticipate that they will reach some sort of an agreement to avoid another government shutdown. Nobody wants another government shutdown, and the country doesn't need one, for sure.
Your concerns about federal actions over the last year, particularly as far as the one big beautiful bill impacting Massachusetts, we saw with the governor releasing her budget yesterday, slashing billions in funding for healthcare, education, and social services. The state now facing a lot of budget pressure underneath this, and there doesn't seem to be any end in sight to this.
Well, the other part of it with the big bill is the following, that it was a tax cut for very wealthy people. That's not to be denied. And I also think that the other part of the legislation that the president proposed as it related to DOGE and the cuts, they never really happened. So you will see, however, that the state is not going to receive the same amount of money that it's received in the past. We've had initiatives right around here in the Valley that have been arbitrarily eliminated, some really good ones. And I think that as you look at the budget cycle here with the big bill, that it wasn't what they said it was going to be. But you know, one of the great ironies of this, Dave, is they've already changed the name of it because they know how unpopular the term big, beautiful bill was.
Yeah, beautiful to some people, but not to everybody.
Well, it would be beautiful to about the top 1% of wage earners in America.
Yeah. I know, speaking of DOGE, you and Congressman John Larson are demanding a full criminal investigation into DOGE and the leak of private records to Musk and Associates, and you want congressional action, to seek congressional action on this. Let's talk more about that.
I met with the whistleblower. He contacted me.
Really? Okay.
And he came to the office, and he did not bring an attorney with him. He just spoke to me about what he said in his assessment was happening with DOGE as it relates to Social Security Administration, SSA. And he said, at the time, he said that information that is being procured by these DOGE appointees without congressional confirmation, it is being used for untoward purposes. And he was a very good witness when he came in. A lot of times, as you know, in this business, because of your news days, sometimes the source is not what they advertise themselves to be.
Axe to grind.
Exactly. And in this case here, he was pretty thorough and pretty good. So the case sort of languished. I began to ask questions. They were dismissed by our Republican colleagues. The administration dismissed the allegations. But in the court filings, which are supposed to be truthful, particularly as it relates to the federal courts, the decision was made upon review to have the administration say, in fact, this whistleblower was correct, and that this information had been procured for the purpose of passing it on to political operatives. Now, there's a lot of information in Social Security, including your number, that you don't want to share. If you get a credit card, they don't publish your whole Social Security number on it. Your driver's license could be there. And getting access to that information could become very political in nature. So I think that this case now is, I think, going to be back front and center. We're certainly going to demand to hear from the whistleblower. He does and has brought a lawsuit against the federal government. We need to know the names of the people who took that information. We know tangentially who they are, but we need to have those names published and what they did with the information.
Yeah, speaking of, as far as the release of information and everything else, you know, the Social Security information and everything else coming out of DOGE, what we're looking at in Minnesota, there's also, the FBI was in Georgia, too, to look at election files, too. They're talking about, Kristi Noem was saying that in Minnesota, well, release the voting records in Minnesota and we'll maybe be able to ease the situation. It's like leveraging one off the other.
I don't understand this. And the Constitution is clear that states and localities, they have responsibility for electioneering.
Sure.
The president continuing to harp on this idea that he won the election in 2020 is not based on any evidence whatsoever. You can't find a Republican in the Senate that would say that Trump won the election. He lost the election by 7 million votes. This notion that somehow Fulton County, which is really Atlanta, was responsible for widespread voter fraud, it's just not borne out by the facts.
No.
But why they keep going back to it, and incidentally, this is overreach by the FBI. They should not be going in based upon the whims of the president to investigate an election that is settled law.
A long time ago, too. And as far as the exchanging of the voter records for what happens with ICE in Minnesota, too, that's...
Look, there is almost no evidence of any widespread voter fraud in America.
Anywhere, yeah.
When you look at the results of these elections, even if from time to time a correction has to be made, it's not based upon ineligible voters. This isn't the 1940s and 50s in America. This is pretty sophisticated in terms of the tallies that take place, and democracy comes to rely upon it. So in 2016, we accepted the result of the presidential election. In 2020, Donald Trump rejected the result of the election. And then in 2024, we accepted the result of the election. So I think the theme here is if he wins the election, there's no fraud. If he loses the election, there's fraud.
Are you afraid? It seems like there's some backdoor workings now to even try to stop the midterm elections from happening.
Well, I mean, I think we need to be mindful of it. I think it'll be very hard to do. I also think that in this case that the president has threatened, again, peripherally, that the midterm elections would be loaded with fraud and that he might have to intervene. Yeah. But he took a different tact, as you know, over the course of the last couple of days in Iowa, when his position became more Machiavellian and said, we can't lose the midterm elections, which at the moment they seem likely to lose.
Yeah. All right. We have to take a break. When we come back, Congressman and I are going to talk about what's going on in Venezuela, Venezuelan oil, Greenland, and the Epstein Files, too. Welcome back. My guest this week is Springfield Congressman Richard Neal. Congressman, just recently the Senate voting 52-47 to block President Trump from using any kind of force in Venezuela. It seems like both sides are uniting against the fact that we don't need another war.
Well, it's also a reminder, Maduro was, and has been a bad guy. Right. But there are a lot of bad guys on earth. And I think now they are being reticent about getting out the details of what the occupation will mean. And I think that trying to find somebody who can stabilize the country in the interim is going to be a challenge for sure. I also think as it relates to Venezuela, there is a parallel. We were sold a bad bill of goods in Iraq. That's the reason I voted against the war in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that keeps coming to mind for me is the late Vice President Dick Cheney, when asked about how we're going to pay for all of this, he said not to worry, oil would pay for it. That's essentially what President Trump is saying right now. It's certainly what J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio have been saying. My guess is that it's going to entail a considerable number of American dollars beyond any oil.
All about oil.
Well, I would like to think that it was about promoting democracy, but my sense is that the president's protestations seem to indicate that it's clearly about oil reserves.
And many of these petroleum companies, too, it seems like they're reluctant to even get involved in this.
Well, for good reason. I mean, if Venezuela tomorrow were to have its markets across the globe open for oil, it still would only generate about 1% increase. I mean, a lot of the Maduro years meant that the upgrades that had to take place never did. Yeah. And the result is this would not really have a big impact at the moment on international markets. And recall that oil is traded as an international commodity.
Right. We see them for the United States Navy enforcing the blockade to determine which tankers can depart. Now, the proceeds from this they're being deposited into U.S. controlled accounts. Where is that?
That's what the Secretary of State is testifying. Yeah. That it'll be put in a reserve capacity and it will be used to finance whatever investments are needed in Venezuela. What that means at the moment, I think it's hard to assess.
After weeks of escalating threats and bluster about Greenland, it seems that the president has finally reached a mutual agreement with Denmark. He's been vague on details. What are you hearing?
Greenland's not for sale.
No.
And Denmark has made that very clear. But simultaneously, they've been a great ally of ours, a great friend. They participated in Afghanistan and Iraq and interventions around the world that have been supportive of American interests. What's striking to me is we're pushing away NATO allies. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Greenland in particular, the Danish government has said clearly, look, we are open to an accommodation here. If you want to expand the military presence here, sure, we're fine with that. But that's never the bluster that comes with the administration. It's always that somehow this is an eminent domain issue. We'll just seize Greenland. And you can see what it's done to the NATO alliance. I think that they are now beginning to reassess the American partnership and whether America would keep its word in this particular instance. So I think Greenland, it's also made us a bit of an outlier in the world because of the way that this argument has been prosecuted.
You look at this and the meetings that the president has had with other foreign leaders and everything else, it just seems to be the wall is getting bigger and bigger between us and our lifelong allies.
Well, since Harry Truman signed the NATO agreement for the United States, there's no question that America's been the leader, and oftentimes for good reason.
Right.
And America has come to the defense of Europe time and again, or the threat of Soviet expansion. But look at Ukraine now with what's happened there. And the idea of NATO was always that we would all stand together based upon the agreement that was reached in the aftermath of World War II against Soviet aggression. And if you and I were sitting here in 1989, we would have found it hard to believe that the Soviet Union was collapsing in Eastern Europe. But the Bulgarians, the Romanians, the Poles, they don't want Russian domination again. And they've pushed back pretty hard. And that's why they've been so supportive of the Ukrainian effort. So I worry that isolationism has not served America well in our history. And Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr., they would abhor what is now being said about NATO.
Yeah. You know, we've talked about this before, that the fact that all of this what's going on in Greenland, Venezuela, is part of the effort to draw attention away from the Epstein Files.
I think that is part of it. The diversionary tactics from the administration almost on an hourly basis now are pretty clear. That it becomes, how do you change the subject?
Yeah.
And in the Epstein Files, Congress has made it clear Democrats and Republicans release the documents. And the Attorney General should not have her foot in a door jam. Just released all the documents. I think that we want to find out, and then you can make, I think, an assessment afterwards when all the details are released for public inspection. I think that is what Congress intended, and that's precisely what should be done.
What are you hearing, too, because we've talked about this as far as President Trump and that unprecedented campaign against Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, and the fact that yesterday Powell said we're going to keep the interest rates even. What are you hearing on that? What's the latest?
I think Jerome Powell has done a really fine job.
And he's a Trump appointee.
Well, he's a Trump appointee, a reappointee in the instance, recommended by Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin at the time, a Trump appointee. And Jay Powell looks at evidence. He looks at the facts. He has said that when inflation becomes, in his judgment, sustainable at 2%, then we can proceed with lowering interest costs. But in the interim, he has said the tariffs are causing part of the inflationary trends that we're witnessing. You're a New Englander, I'm a New Englander. We would have known a lot of guys like Jay Powell growing up, a Republican, very responsible, very budget conscious, and a very decent human being.
Yeah.
You know, his history is much in the Bush administrations. He dates back, he worked as a regulator for Bush 1, and he has really sustained that position over a career. He is well regarded by a lot of Republicans who don't want to say anything in public.
Yeah.
But I think that his hand has been very steady at the Federal Reserve Board. And I hope that his successor is not so political that interest rates will be adjusted based upon the whims of the president. That would be a disaster. The Federal Reserve Board is 113 years old. Their primary thrust, prices, for sure, and employment. That's their responsibility.
All right, we'll take another break. Please. More with Congressman Neal when we come back. Our last segment with Congressman Richard Neal. One of the things I wanted to touch on, what we've seen this week, an attack against a Minnesota congresswoman. These attacks on congressmen and senators is frightening.
Well, they're more prevalent, that's for sure. It's now in the thousands. And I think part of it is online anonymity.
Yeah.
I think the Capitol Police are pretty good. They're very capable of tracking a lot of this, and they are. We hear from them and meet with them with some regularity. They're a terrific police force, and they follow these threats on a minute-to-minute basis. But I think the episode that we witnessed over the weekend with Congresswoman Omar is indicative of where the national conversation has gone. You don't have to agree with her, but intimidation, threats, and physical violence, it's unacceptable.
Well, yeah, the fact that you're out there, I mean, you're out in the public all the time.
Well, you're out there, and you also now you are advised to do certain things that I would have denied the reality of for a long period of time about where you are with crowds and all of that. But I also think that if we're doing any district visits and we think there's potential for controversy, then you do alert the Capitol Police.
Sure. You were yesterday in Chicopee, Mayor John Viewed, and make a significant announcement relative to the ongoing challenges of the Chicopee water treatment plant and the impact on the Connecticut and Chicopee rivers. Big influx of money to help ease that problem with nitrogen, right?
It's nitrogen elimination,
Yeah.
and it's a big issue here in the Valley, as you know. We've tried very hard. I think almost $12 million we've directed of federal spending in Chicopee to help the ratepayers and the city alleviate the threat to their water supply and the buildup of nitrogen. This is a long-standing undertaking. It goes way back to the inception of the Environmental Protection Agency, which was signed by President Richard Nixon. It tells you how times have changed.
Sure.
But clean air and clean water, they have to remain a major part of our quest. Singularly, the one issue that is promoted, longer life across the globe, is clean water.
For all of us. We are out of time. As you may have known by now, that the Congressman and I, once a month, we take a long-form version of this, and from usually with the congressmen in Washington, and we talk about the issues that are impacting us. If you have any questions for the Congressman, I hope you send them my way, and we'll be doing that in another couple of weeks, I think.
Look forward always, Dave.
It's always good. Always a good conversation.
Yep.
It's Congressman Neal. Good
Great
to
be
see
with
you.
you. Thanks.
Good to see you in person.
Yep.
All right.
It is good.
That does it for us. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a good weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week for Getting Answers.